Horror. Whether it be movies, games, or even books, horror media can almost always be found with one single constant: a monster, an antagonist, something to be afraid of. Usually, this is literal: zombies, serial killers, stalkers, and even more indirect antagonists like animals, natural disasters, and disease. But what if there wasn't a monster? Well, we get to see that in a small game by solo indie developer Katana Levi called Daemonologie. The premise of the game is simple. We are a witch finder that has been summoned to a remote Scottish village with the simple task of finding a witch by the 5th dawn of our visit. We must speak to, interrogate, and even torture the village's inhabitants in the pursuit of justice. Will we be able to find the witch, or will we doom the village to the witch's curse? We'll see that in just a moment. But first, I need to quickly throw in a content warning for what this game contains. It's all in black and white, but there is still some disturbing imagery, so if you're uncomfortable with that stuff, you have been warned. I have some quick disclaimers before we start as well. This game is intended so that you have to play through it multiple times in order to understand the full story. Instead of telling the story this way, I have tried to tie in everything as if it happened in a single playthrough. But just know that you won't see everything in your first playthrough if you decide to get the game yourself. Daemonologie is just $3 on Steam and takes about 30 minutes to play. If you like visual novels, I highly recommend you check this one out, as it's absolutely worth your time. If that isn't an option for you, I've provided my playthrough of it in the description below. Due to the nature of needing to play multiple times for the full story, I will not be making a no commentary playthrough, but I'm sure you can find one online. Anyway, look out for any post-recording notes at the top of the screen, and make sure to check if there's a pinned comment before commenting. And let us begin with the story of The game begins with the first of many beautifully made stop-motion cutscenes. This scene describes what I've already told you. We are a witch finder, called here to uncover the truth of the mysterious happenings in this tiny Scottish village. We're tasked with finding this witch by the 5th dawn of our visit. Why this is so is unclear, but my theory is that's simply just how much time we were paid for. I'll explain why I think this towards the end of the story. After this short cutscene, the gameplay begins. The gameplay loop is simple. There are 4 days, and each day is split into 4 sections. During each section, we may go to one of the 6 locations in the village and talk to the townsfolk that resides there. There's the humble fisherman, Firen, who is strangely covered in hair, at the entrance of the town called Brothwell's Crossing. The blacksmith, Oswin, at the smith's abode. The shepherd, Violet, who tends to her sheep. The pastor, Father Usby, at the church. The maiden, Lilius, who practices herbal healing at a mysterious place called the Ring of Stains. And finally, a mysterious old woman named Griselda, who wanders the woods at the edge of town, scaring away anyone who dares draw near. If they won't speak the full truth, we have the ability to torture them in a myriad of ways, from bloodletting, classic drowning, or even pulling off their tongue, Jesus Christ. Finishing a new conversation or torturing a villager will progress the day to the next segment, meaning we only have effectively 16 conversations to uncover the truth. We start our hunt at the entrance of the town where we meet fisherman Firen, a humble, kind man who just has one curious thing about him. He's covered from head to toe in hair. But that isn't proof enough, so we introduce ourselves. He immediately denies any claims about witches in the town. Just tall tales and zealotry, nothing more. There isn't much we can get out of this first conversation besides a general understanding of who Firen is. He seems nice, the kind of guy who just lets life pass him by and accepts the things life gives him. He likes fishing, and that's all he needs. But he's not out of the woods yet. A good first impression isn't enough for Detective Socks, no siree. We'll be back. But for now, we move on to our next location, to meet the man that hired us in the first place. Blacksmith Oswin is a stocky, imposing man with a massive metal fixture attached to his face. After introducing ourselves, he explains that he hired us because he believes that the shepherd, Violet, had cursed him to make his jaw fall off, and explains that's what the metal fixture is for. He not only says to hang her, but he wants it to be painful. For those who don't know, the short drop is a hanging that doesn't break your neck or sever your vertebrae, but instead it's the stereotypical movie one you see that's drawn out to make them suffocate. Despite this scathing accusation, he seems to be a fine man. He describes that he doesn't have much work in the town besides horseshoes and plow repairs, and because of this, he's a little cynical and brash, but that's neither here nor there. Just because he hired us doesn't mean he's innocent. With a few of the townsfolk, we are able to ask them about who else lives in the town. This is less for a census, but more of an idea of what they think of everyone else to suss out any motives. Notable remarks here is that he agrees Firin is a kind soul, and he says that the old woman in the forest is crazy. We'll see that for ourselves, though. But first, we need to meet the rest of the town. Next, following Oswin's accusations, we move to seek out the shepherd. Arriving at her home, we see a rather concerning scene. 5 of the 6 visible sheep are dead, but from the limited graphics, we can't really tell what happened. Approaching the shepherd, she appears to be in distress, rightfully so. She claims a curse has been put upon her by none other than the blacksmith, that he sent a wolf familiar to slaughter her sheep. Stepping aside from this accusation briefly, we ask her if she loves God. She says that after all this, she's questioning if he even cares for her. Our character kind of flips out about this, demands she respects God or else she'll be the one subject to the noose. This is the first implication of our character's obsession with his job. Beyond getting rid of the witch, our character is obsessed with his faith. At a surface level, there isn't any harm in that, but as we'll see, it goes much deeper. We move on to ask about the blacksmith's accusations, to which she points out the more likely instance of him doing it himself in an accident. So far, no one seems particularly suspicious. Everyone is on edge, but we can't point fingers just yet. Our last stop of the day is the church, where we meet Father Usby. He behaves as expected, feigning shock when we tell him about why we're here, offering as much help as he can give. Asking the same question about who else lives here, we get some interesting information. Here, we find out that the town very recently used to have 9 people instead of 6. The blacksmith is now a widower, with his wife being taken by a fever. The shepherd's husband ran away from the town with some unpaid debts, and the maiden apparently had a boyfriend that has apparently been missing for this past week. He also comes out of nowhere, calling the maiden an ungodly whore. We'll see why this is eventually, but where the blacksmith and shepherd have their feuds, the pastor and maiden have theirs. The only other thing he has to say is a further accusation that he saw the maiden dancing with shadows in the night, but he doesn't provide any context. Right now, we don't have a ton to go off of. Besides the fishermen, the rest of the village all seems fairly suspicious. The blacksmith has been accused of having a wolf familiar, the shepherd accused of cursing the blacksmith's jaw to fall off. The maiden has been accused of dancing with shadows, and the pastor is just suspicious overall, both being very aggressive towards the maiden but also seeming to be too kind and clueless for the current situation. We don't have all the pieces to this puzzle yet, but it's only the end of the first day. However, at night, something very strange happens to our character. They suddenly have their first of many prophetic dreams. The pastor is chanting aggressively with his hands pointed downward, towards hell. As he does this, giant slugs fall from the ceiling, as if summoned by the pastor himself. Behind them, a ghastly skeletal figure lifts her hands and subsequently, the pastor as well. The dream ends as the pastor magically hangs upside down, his body posed in the shape of an upside-down cross. So what the hell was that about? Well, each night our character receives one of these prophetic dreams to help us understand who the witch might be. Right now, all fingers are pointed towards the pastor, but the dream might not have shown the whole truth, and so we wake, the story beginning to be told. Yesterday, we didn't have the chance to meet every person in the town, so we have to spend the first half of this second day fulfilling that requirement. It's time we meet the maiden herself, a somber woman sitting alone at a mysterious ring of stones. A ritual site, maybe? She introduces herself and also explains that she practices herbal medicine. We ask her about the other residents. Interesting information here is her opinion on Father Usby, who she says not to seek salvation from, that he's a religious zealot and he can no longer be trusted. She doesn't have anything mean to say about anyone else, besides adding on to the supposed craziness of the old woman in the woods. So this accusation is rather important. We ask if she has ever communed with Satan, an accusation she quickly denies. We ask her about the pastor's accusation of her dancing with shadows, to which she replies that not only is that untrue, but since her boyfriend went missing, she doesn't have much motivation to dance at all. She also points out the obvious question that, what would the pastor be doing around here at night? We'll see about that soon, but let's finally visit this old woman of the woods that everyone claims is crazy. She is immediately hostile. She shockingly begins by saying that the village is full of witches, and that she's one too, and that she'll curse us for trespassing. She's aggressive, explaining all the things she'll curse us with and throwing insult after insult at the witchfinder. So, what? Case closed, I guess. I mean, this woman practically admitted to it with her threats of curses and spells. But would it really be that simple? I mean, everyone says she's crazy, so maybe this is just that? We still have 2.5 days left, but we definitely have a bit more to work with now. Now that we've met everyone, it's time to dig deeper. Talking has gotten us nowhere, so it's time to get serious. Our first stop? The church with Father Usby. At least in my playthrough, I was super suspicious of the pastor. Maybe it was the stereotype in religious horror movies of it always being the pastor somehow, but I also think he wasn't telling the whole truth. No one is this rude to one single person out of nowhere, so let's see if he has anything more to say after we loosen his tongue a bit. Ugh. Unsurprisingly, his finger is still pointed at the maiden with yet another scathing accusation. This time, it's that she's been taking newborn babies out to the Ring of Stains that he calls a pagan spiral. We pry a little bit more, asking what his deal with the maiden really is and why he hates her so much. All he has to say is that she isn't a maiden, but a blasphemous pagan harlot. If there was any question about his zealotry, I think that might be gone now. We need more information about this, so we find the maiden again and do what we do best. Most of the torture methods we employ don't really matter, but one of them, the Devil's Mark, is particularly interesting. Where the other methods are only intended to make the person talk, the Devil's Mark has the torturer bleed the accused to find the so-called Mark of the Devil, which lies just beneath the skin. After pricking various spots on her body, we see it. A black growth appears on her back as we prick just the right spot. Something must be up here, but it's possible she wasn't the one who placed it there. She denies that her healing is witchcraft, just various herbs and spices as expected. She rightly guesses that we're here because of the pastor's accusations. She says that he has too much power over the community, and that his zealotry has begun to affect them all. Her mention of his slimy tendrils remind us of the slugs we saw him summon in our dream. We ask her about Usby's accusation of her bringing newborn babies up to the spiral. She admits that she did, but not out of any nefarious reason. She admits that she and Gavin, her boyfriend, were expecting, but that Father Usby was aggressively against it due to them not being married. She doesn't say it outright, but what she means is clear. The pastor forced her into an abortion. Or worse, to get rid of the child after it was born. The maiden is miserable and ashamed about the situation. Between Gavin's missing state and the loss of her child, she spends her days sobbing at the only place that doesn't feel hostile. We leave without saying another word, and the second day comes to an end. Tonight, we are plagued by yet another prophetic dream. The skeletal figure from the previous dream sits at the center of a fairy ring at night. She coddles what is assumedly a newborn baby in her arms before stringing it up on something above her, where we see multiple others hanging around them. One of the bundles falls onto the ground and opens, revealing a horrid monstrosity vaguely resembling a baby. It writhes around and cries before falling onto its back, its head splitting open and releasing dozens of baby spiders, thus ending the second dream. Gross. If it weren't for that previous realization, this would make the maiden look far more suspicious. But again, we didn't see the maiden in the stream, and she isn't the only one who could be doing this. But we'll keep this in mind for the future. Yesterday, after meeting Griselda, she practically admitted to being a witch. I mean, if we weren't forced to investigate for 2 more days, I feel like she'd be the obvious choice here. But if we know anything about games like this, red herrings are more than likely. Torturing her doesn't help her cause all that much. She says she's a witch, but also accuses the shepherd and fisherman of being witches as well. It's really interesting that the fisherman and the old woman both exist in this town. The first saying there's no witches in the town at all, and the second saying that everyone's a witch. But again, nothing Griselda says is making any sense. She's angry, violent, and the only person not afraid of the Witchfinder. I can't help but feel like things aren't as simple as they seem here. but it would be disingenuous to not at least investigate her claim, so we leave to get more information out of the shepherd. She insists on her innocence and points her finger at the blacksmith again. She explains that his jaw fell off in an exchange with the devil to kill her sheep and drive her out of the village, presumably in retaliation for her not paying him for the fence he built. This is getting intense. This is a pretty wild accusation to make, and I mean, none of these accusations have had any proof behind them. And also, earlier she said she was suspicious that his jaw falling off was an accident, so why does she change her mind about it now? But I suppose that's just how these things are, right? We can only work with word of mouth, so we need as much information as possible. Following the line of accusations, we seek out the blacksmith to force more information out of him. Unsurprisingly, he is steadfast in his opinion as well, demanding we hang the shepherd. He says that she left a decapitated lamb's head at his doorstep with strange symbols written in its blood. We tell him that we didn't see the head, but we did see the blood, to which he replies that he's seen the same symbols out by the woods. So who is he even accusing here? The lamb would imply the shepherd, but now he's talking about the woods, which would point towards the old woman. Everyone here is confused, clearly, but we will get to the end of this regardless of how confusing it is. At this point in my playthrough, I decided that the shepherd and blacksmith were innocent. I assumed that they were just angry at each other, and that these random and extreme witch accusations weren't based in anything but their resentment for the other person. And so I turned my sights back on my primary suspect, the pastor. Torturing him just releases more of his zealotry. He loudly claims that this must be a test of faith on him and the rest of the town. He calls the other villagers filth, says the shepherd's husband was a coward and that he must have ran away due to something she did, says she's likely a witch and that she must be working with the maiden too. Before we end the night, is anyone else confused? It's like everyone here, save the fisherman, has forefingers pointed at the rest of the villagers no matter what we do. No one really seems set on one person being a witch either. The pastor just changed his mind to accuse the shepherd. The blacksmith started pointing at the old woman. The shepherd has changed her accusations twice now on what the blacksmith even did to her, and the old woman has said that literally everyone there is a witch. Feeling overwhelmed? Yeah, that's on purpose. But maybe tomorrow will make it all make sense. We have one more day left to understand everything, so let's sleep on it and hope that it all makes sense tomorrow. As you all know, though, our sleep isn't really safe. Tonight, our nightmares continue. This time, we're in the woods. We see an unfamiliar man hobble awkwardly through the woods until pausing for a moment. The witch we've seen in previous dreams appears again, whisking her way through the trees. The man looks down at his hands as tree branches sprout from it. He keels over, clutching his chest, until... the woods. Seems like some more evidence towards the old woman here. But we don't see her in this dream, just the witch that's been in every other dream. Other people can go to the woods as well, so this doesn't really confirm anything. But like all our dreams, we now wake up with that new information and hope that what we find helps our case a little more. Despite not having any suspicion of him, the old woman did accuse the fisherman of being a witch as well. So we seek him out, and of course, do what we do best. This doesn't change anything though, and unfortunately, we wasted our time here. He repeats that not only is he not a witch, but no one in the town is at all. We try to move on to the maiden and get more information out of her too. She continues to point her finger at the pastor, saying that he dances with imps and beasts at night. After asking her when she saw this, all she says is, all the time. She continues though, pointing now at the old woman of the woods, saying that men have gone missing in her woods, never to return. Claims that those men are being turned into trees by the old woman's dastardly witchcraft, and that's why her love, Gavin, has gone missing as well. Now, what does that remind me of? By this time in my playthrough, though, I was steadfast in my opinion that the old woman was not the witch, just crazy. How would you even prove someone was turned into a tree? No, my sight was still set on the priest. He's too suspicious here, pointing fingers at everyone else and feigning ignorance the whole time. After another helping of torture, we finally get the truth. He says that he was visited by a black goat, an effigy of the devil, and begged it to let him be with the maiden. That's right, he hates her out of jealousy. He says that he deserves her. And to add a cherry on top, he admits that Gavin didn't go missing. He killed the poor boy out of his overwhelming jealousy, and then forced the maiden to abort his child. A truly selfish act. We ask about the maiden's idea that Gavin was killed by the old woman. He just uses this as an opportunity to insult her paganism again, just calling the idea stupid and dismissing this entirely. It's the final section of the final day, and due to the dream and the maiden's suspicion, we visit the old woman one final time. Obviously, nothing comes from this, and she continues to say random things and point at everyone else. This time, the blacksmith. She claims that he dances with the devil's flames, flames made from the brightest white, too bright for the flames of this earth. Unfortunately, this is technically the end of our time, but I'm choosing to pretend that we had the opportunity to finish the story before making our decision. The old woman has another line of dialogue after being tortured, where she accuses the priest of praying with his hands pointed downward, much like the dream we have of him doing just that. We ask her when she saw this, and she replies, "Tomorrow?" We ask again, and she forgets who we're talking about. We can ask these questions as many times as we want, but she doesn't let up, just leading us in a confusing circle of a conversation. If we torture the shepherd enough, she admits that she lied about the blacksmith having a wolf and raven familiar. She admits that her sheep died due to her own mistake of leaving the gate of the fence open. But she stays on her accusations, this time moving to the fisherman, saying that he's clearly more of a beast than a man, that he might have been the one who ate her sheep. I think we all know he's innocent by now, though, so let's move on. Torturing the blacksmith enough gets a similar confession. He admits that the fence wasn't his best work, but still insists the shepherd must be a witch. We can ask him here about the old woman's accusations of him dancing with the devil's flames. After describing what she means by that, he claims that it isn't witchcraft, but science. Our character asks if it's heretical alchemy, a reminder of our own zealotry in the story. Our character has said some pretty intense things to the villagers, and he would honestly fit right into this town. The blacksmith says it isn't alchemy, but a German man sold him a powerful red powder that burns brighter than anything else he has. As far as I'm aware, this is all the dialogue we can see in the game. I may have missed something, but due to the nature of having to replay every time to get new information, and that there is no wiki for this game, I am happy with how much I found. Anyways, the fourth and final day comes to a most confusing end. But the story isn't quite over. Tonight we have one more dream. We see some sheep calmly sitting in a field. The camera shifts to show another sheep off to the side with a darker pattern on its wool. It stares at one of the sheep in the middle of the flock and begins to chant louder and louder, until eventually it looks to the sky as black tendrils pour out of its mouth. This dream, I think, is the least clear. I think it's intended to frame the shepherd, but I don't see how it's connected to her beyond there just being sheep in it. This is the first dream so far that we don't see the mysterious witch creature, which I think is very curious. Maybe the sheep with the black wool is meant to represent her in some way, or perhaps it's supposed to be one of the familiars that the shepherd mentioned. I'll talk about this in a bit, but I think the confusion here might be intentional. There is a fifth dream that you can see as well if you play through the game again. This one is for the blacksmith. We see him from behind, hammering across repeatedly as the white sparks of the so-called devil's flame flash behind him. He is surrounded by cages of undecipherable masses of flesh. He begins to hammer the cross faster and faster. In the shadows, the same dark sheep from the previous dream appears and begins to convulse. The blacksmith turns to it, revealing his face to be a grotesque crow's skull. And finally, the sheep's head appears to fall off onto the ground. And the blacksmith begins to laugh. The bright white flames, the construction of the cross, the head of the crow being one of the familiars the shepherd accused him of having, and the black sheep that seems to bring pain wherever it goes. This is all too much. We wake up, and it's time. The fifth dawn has arrived, and we need to choose who we think is the witch. In my playthrough, I chose to hang the pastor, of course. I decided that it wasn't clear who the witch actually was, but the pastor did straight up kill a guy, so he does deserve to hang for his crimes. We choose him, and so he hangs. We're handed a bag of gold for our efforts, and we set off to help the next wayward villager that finds themselves in need of our services. And then, the game ends. Yeah, that's it. But there's still one massive question. Who was the witch? Well, it doesn't tell you, and that's for one very clear reason. I already spoiled it, but there was no witch. And even if there was, our character doesn't care as long as he gets paid. You could choose to hang any of the 6 villagers, and no matter what, we get the same ending. If you look closely in the background, as the Witchfinder is turning back to his carriage to leave, the person you hanged is struggling in the noose. They took the short drop. They weren't just killed, but they suffered for it too. But what about all the accusations? Men being turned into trees, flames derived from hell, wolf and raven familiars, dances in the night, and heretical prayers. Well, let me explain. All of the villagers were completely innocent. Fisherman Fearon wasn't covered in hair because he was some beast-human hybrid, but instead he has a hereditary condition passed down by his father called hypertrichosis, a rare disorder that causes the victim to rapidly grow hair on all parts of their body. The old crone Griselda's behavior was very indicative of someone with Alzheimer's disease. The random bursts of anger and rampant threats and crazy accusations, waywardly pacing through the woods, forgetting things she was even talking about mid-sentence, and overall confusion, it all makes sense. She was suffering. The maiden was simply a pagan who practiced herbal healing. The Ring of Stains is a very mysterious place, but there's no guarantee that she put it there. It could have been there for centuries, and just became a peaceful and unique place to stay. She believed that the death of her lover was due to Griselda turning him into a tree, but as we know, that wasn't the case. The pastor was a jealous and aggressive man, who, between his zealotry and jealousy, killed the maiden's lover and forced her to abort the child she had with him. The blacksmith and shepherd were both recently widowed, and were emotionally volatile because of it. In his grief, the blacksmith did a poor job crafting her fence, and due to this, the shepherd refused to pay him, and then her sheep were slaughtered due to her leaving the gate open. This snowballed into the blacksmith calling the Witchfinder on her. About 5 years before this game takes place, German alchemist Hennig Brandt had found and distributed the element we now know as phosphorus. And guess what? Prolonged exposure to phosphorus without protection causes a disease called phossy jaw, which causes the deterioration of bones in the mouth, possibly even leading to your jaw falling off. And yeah, there really never was a witch. They were all innocent. But what about the accusations from the torture? Well, I'll ask you. Would you lie to someone just to get them to stop torturing you? I certainly would if I didn't have the answers they wanted. Would a witch admit to being one anyways? I doubt it, especially when mercy to the whims of a witchfinder. Okay, but what about the dreams then? They had to be something, right? Are any of your dreams real? Have you ever been shown a glimpse of the future or truth in a dream? And I mean, come on, what do you think the dreams of a witchfinder would look like? Especially after hearing everyone's accusations. They were definitely prophetic dreams, but more of the self-fulfilling kind. The point of this video was that there was no monster in this game, but I'm sorry to say that that's a lie. There is a monster. We were the monster. We came into this village with one goal: to get paid and to fill our religious fantasy. Once we got both, it didn't matter who was hanged. We tortured who we wanted and left when we didn't need to be there anymore. I mean, why did we have to leave on the 5th day? Well, my theory is that's just how long his services could be bought for. He didn't need to find the witch by then, due to any real threat, just because his shift was over. The only thing here that I don't have an explanation for is the Devil's Mark method of torture. I'm not really sure how to explain this, but what's interesting is that this mark appears no matter who you perform the act on. It's so strange that it still appears that all of these people have this so-called Devil's Mark. My only theory is that this is an effect of the Witchfinder's biased view. Maybe the final prick just bled these people too much and it just looked like that? Who knows? If you have any idea about why this might be, let me know in the comments, because I can't find any explanation for it, both in my studies and online. Finally, in a sea of villagers saying whatever they wanted and pointing fingers in any direction, there was one person who was honest and truthful the whole time. Translating it to Scots Gaelic, we can find that Fisherman Fearon's name translates directly to truth. The whole game, this poor man insisted that there were no witches in the town and begged us not to hurt them any longer. And he was right the whole time. Daemonologie is a really interesting game. I'm very happy I had the chance to play it, and I love these small indie projects no matter what. I do have a few notes, though. I found the dialogue in this game to be lacking in depth. Most conversations you have are very short, and you're lucky to have the option for the Witchfinder to ask another question. Sometimes you'd be able to ask questions that seemed super random and inhuman. Why are we only able to ask the maiden if she's ever communed with the devil? Why are we only able to ask the shepherd if she loves God? It all seems a bit disjointed, in my opinion, and I think the intentional confusion added by the creator might have gone too far. Also, the insight mechanic of telling a villager what someone else told them doesn't work about 30% of the time. I'd get info from one villager, go to the villager they accused, and suddenly I wasn't able to use that insight. It seemed pretty inconsistent to me, which I think may have been a product of this being an indie game. I think there could have been a bit more effort put into the quantity of dialogue, if for no other reason than to just flesh out each character a little more. I actually don't mind that you have to play the game multiple times to get the full picture. If it were like 8 hours long, I'd be more annoyed. Signalis. But since it's only a 30-minute or so experience, it's not the end of the world for me. I wish that the ultimate twist of this game was told in-game. Not everyone is going to analyze the game like I do, or look to the forums for help. A lot of people will see this ending and just get annoyed due to the lack of answers. I think that it would have been nice after finding all the dialogue in the game to have some sort of synopsis or conclusion for the players who play the whole game. I understand that it's okay to have the player try to understand things themselves, but I think at least a little bit of closure might have been nice. I do very much recommend you play this game for yourself, though. Its atmosphere is very well put together, the music is amazing, and of course the wonderfully animated stop-motion cutscenes are worth the $3 price tag alone. Between the animations and beautiful pixel art, this game is an absolute artistic beauty. And that's going to be all for this video. I hope you enjoyed my storytelling, analysis, and commentary for this game. Let me know what you thought of the game and my analysis in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, I urge you to subscribe and maybe check out some of my other analyses. I'm super excited about the next game we'll be covering, so be sure to look forward to that. Anyways, thanks so much for supporting my content. I super appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel like they do. If you're interested in becoming a member, you can do so by clicking the white join button or the link in the description, where you can also find a bunch of other links to my socials and the community Discord. I'll stop yapping now. Thanks so much for watching again, and bye-bye.